Welcome to what is a community forum. We're talking about a particular topic today. It's the Small Farm Project. We're trying to put all the jigsaw puzzles together, pieces together to preserve small farm in Spencer for dedicating it to agriculture permanently. So it will be specifically for production of agricultural products. I've got some people involved with the farm and the project sitting here with me. Mary Baker Wood, most of you will probably already know. She's been the librarian for the town of Spencer for some time. And, but you may not know that her family owns property abutting Small Farm, and she grew up with the current owners, the Smalls, and has some good knowledge about its history as well as a history buff for the town. Next to Mary is John Michek and his wife Kim Michek. They're the people actually farming the farm, and they run Breezy Gardens in Leicester, where they live. And so they're intimately involved with the agriculture that's happening there. And then down at the end is Malcolm Spiker, who has been helping manage wildlife down there and has been for some time. He was the chairman of Spencer Conservation Commission. And he will talk about some of the aspects of the river and the brook that run through there. As part of this project, it's got a bunch of pieces that have to fit together. In order for it to be preserved as a farm, since the Small family wants to divest themselves of it, none of them live there currently, John and Kim, who've been farming it for some time, are going to buy the farmland. The state of Massachusetts is going to pay the difference between farmland price and what it would bring, the farmland would bring if it were sold for development. The Smalls are going to sell the house and barn separately with 3.7 acres. If you know anybody who would like a beautiful historic house, tell them about it. And then part of this funding for the states buying the development value has to come from a local contribution. And the town voted $3,000, which helps, but there needs to be $8,250 more. Common Ground Land Trust stepped in to raise the rest of that money, and we're still trying to raise it. We've landed a grant for $5,000. It's a matching grant, and we're making some progress on getting the other $5,000 we need to finish things off and pay for survey expenses. The last piece of this is, if the deal goes through, the Small family is going to give Common Ground Land Trust a trail access easement along the river and then turning up Turkey Hill Brook. People have fished there forever, and that will ensure that the public can continue to go along that strip between the fields and the river and fish, and also walk or bird watch. So that's what we're trying to do, and we hope people will contribute. Mary knows the most about the history of the farm, so we're going to start there.
Thank you. I just want to say that I've been speaking this week with members of the Small family and had some wonderful times to reminisce about what is probably one of the most beautiful pieces of farmland in Spencer, and it is probably one of the most iconic. People who come through the town know that farm, know that space. It's been farmed now back into the 1700s. In terms of history, the farmland itself has been, as far as historical records, there's been a house and a farm there since at least the late 1700s. It's interesting in local newspapers and local history that they don't talk much about dairy farming or farms until the late 1800s, even though dairy farming was the #1 form of agriculture in Spencer for most of its history. We know from maps that there was a family farming that land from the late 1800s. We know that up until the Smalls purchased it, it remained as a dairy farm. It's interesting to note that it was purchased in 1952 as a dairy farm. Mr. Small actually had been a lifelong farmer. He still has family in New Braintree, but that when we look at records about who was farming in Spencer, and I think we'll get to that afterwards, is that records say in 1931 there were 142 farms in Spencer whose business was to dairy farm, and so they were producing something like 8,000 quarts of milk a day. By the 1950s, after the World War, a lot of the farming had declined. By the time I believe your family became involved in it, there were probably 13 dairy farms or so left in Spencer. Now we have next to no family farms left. So when I talk about the small farm, I'm really talking about a place that that is the very picture. It's the cultural heritage for Spencer. It's the place that we think of. Spencer and New England and America have an agricultural history. That was the history of the founders. So it's really important that we remember the memories. The Small family bought the farm in 1952 and had actually owned it for over 60 years. We've come to a point in the process where they really decided they needed to find a way to keep that going. If you know anything about farming or raising on the land itself, that place is in their hearts. And I know that they could have taken an easier choice than this and didn't. Growing up, Mr. Small, known as Mike to most of us, was a favorite of all the kids growing up. I know one of the touches he had was that if you were close to the family, you always had a cow named after you. When that cow moved along, it was named after you again. So there was a wonderful memory. And you have to remember that the Smalls running that farm were amazing businessmen and worked incredibly hard. People take for granted what farming involves. I remember one of the small family members saying that she hated when we went to the Clark Tourney in Worcester for basketball championships, that people would talk about, oh, those farmers out in Spencer. And it was really almost intended as an insult. And yet Mr. Small was one of the best businessmen I knew, as many farmers were. He knew how to take care of animals. We had Doc Smith who came in, but he was the one who helped when the animals were sick. He knew what it cost to buy feed, to hay the land. So he was a wonderful farmer. And Eleanor, Mrs. Small, was the epitome of an amazing farm wife. She was an amazing cook. All of us who knew her knew the chocolate chip cookies and everything else that came out of the oven. And she cooked for not just the family, but for hired hands. Those were the days when you had a dinner at noontime, and she would produce all three of those meals every day. But she was also a very smart woman. She was a teacher. She actually taught elementary school, taught in the kindergarten in Spencer from 61 to 69, back in the days when it was in the American Legion. So the Small family themselves were people who everyone knew and loved. They were generous to the town. But I think probably if we talk about any experience in the Small farm, the thing that most of us remember is the flood of 1955, and I think some of you probably have heard of it, if not lived it. We lived it. We actually, I lived in the farm land across the street. We actually knew that the water was rising. This was in August of 1955. There had been Hurricane Carol and then Hurricane Diane coming through. The land was soaked at that point. And an interesting thing that doesn't exist anymore is that the wire mills had been active in Spencer, and so the Turkey Hill Brook had been dammed back up. The Sugden Reservoir had dammed the Turkey Hill Brook, and then there were several dams coming through. The water was so great, the storm was bad enough, and the soil was bad enough that a series of dams let go, and it let the water come down that valley. I've spoken with Lee, who I grew up with. We both remember being in our houses watching as that water came over and took out the bridge that was down by the cemetery. What happened on the small farm then was probably the worst devastation of any in Worcester County. That was probably pretty well agreed. You not only had prime agricultural land covered with rocks and gravel, but also all the debris that had come down from the mills. There had been one mill that had been used to raise chickens, and there were dead chickens coming down, spread all over that land. It was heartbreaking. And the very sad thing that most of us close to the family remembered was that Mr. Small, who was a young man, 32 at the time, was dealing with that, what was really a tragedy for a farm family to have that land nearly destroyed. He had a heart attack and was in the hospital while these huge earth movers came in and literally cleared that land. So he then spent, and the whole family spent years putting that back together. They're very proud of an award that they still have. It's a wooden plaque with a tractor on it, and it was given by it was a conservation award to Mr. Small for having preserved that land. So that's a little bit of the actual history and some of the things that we remember.
Yeah.
That's interesting because sometimes when we're plowing, we pull up pieces of the chicken coop.
Yes.
I think it was a whole processing center. And
Yes.
Yeah, and I wondered where they came from. I didn't realize that.
That was it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was a farm, another farm in the area, very, very close actually, and he considered Michael his best farming friend. And he remembers saying to Mr. Small, "You need to stop now," and he just
He
couldn't.
wouldn't.
He just kept working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, very sad.
Kim and I have been connected to this land since we were teenagers, actually. After Mike's untimely death, his wife Eleanor used to rent it out to the dairy farmers in the area, and Kim's grandfather, Clarence Adams, and her uncles, Kenny and Rich, and then my uncle, Vinnie Zukas, rented it for many, many years. So I've been working that land since I was a teenager. Right now, we're using it, it's gone from dairy farm to vegetable production. We have a diversified small fruit and vegetables, and we grow 90% of what we sell is grown right on the farm in Spencer. And it's a beautiful farm. It's got a beautiful mix of soils. It's got some upland soil, which was basically glacier till, which was deposited. It's kind of bony. It does have a lot of rock in it, but it's good soil, and it's good
Adds
early
flavor.
soil. Adds flavor. It's good early soil, so we can work that soil early, and then as the year progresses, we move down to the heavier soils down along the river, the river bottom, river sediment, and there's some deep looms down there. We've never had to irrigate. I never say never, but we have not had to irrigate some of that bottom land. It's got these deep, deep looms. So it's got a wonderful mix of soil. It has water available for when we do have a dry spell, we can irrigate, and we get some most fantastic vegetables and fruits.
And by planting multiple batches, John is able to plant early batches on that soil that dries out faster, warms up quicker, and we're able to harvest things early on the top land, and the lower land has moisture later in the season when it becomes a dry summer season. And he's really gotten to know that farm well over the 30-something years that we've worked with it for vegetables and fruits.
I've watched it I grew up on a farm, and I've watched the rotation sometimes when you shift the crops around. And I always watch the corn very, very carefully to see
With
which
great
batch is coming
anticipation.
ready. And the other thing that intrigues me is I've noticed that you have traps out for integrated pest management that you can monitor what's turning up before it really gets to be a problem, and that way minimize what you have to do in terms of control.
When we started out farming, many, many years ago, we discussed intensely what kind of farming we wish to do. Organic farming as an interest was just picking up speed, but we really felt that organic farming wasn't going to feed the world. On the other hand, we really wanted an environmentally more connected form of farming, more aware of how to benefit the environment and produce a healthier crop, really, something better for people than traditional farming methods had gone. And I think John had gotten a flyer at one of the grower shows about something that UMass, University of Massachusetts Department of Agriculture was proposing, and there were a few professors there that had gotten together and had some really interesting ideas. And so right from the beginning, we were interested in integrated pest management. Probably John can give you more details about it. Each different crop has to be approached in a unique way. So it needs a lot more education, a lot more time, unfortunately, more money to produce crop that way, but it really is better for everybody, we think.
My father said that he was an electrical engineer, and he said that he wasn't smart enough to be a farmer because they had to know about everything. How to fix tractors, how to
Yep.
identify bugs, what to do with fungi.
Yeah, I agree with that. I grew up on a farm too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and I've been impressed with the operation, and I shop at Breezy Gardens, and that's an aspect of this project. This is part of economic business for the town of Spencer. It's part of the feel of the town of Spencer that it has an agricultural fair, and when you drive to it, one of the things you see as you get to the parking or leave the parking is this gorgeous farm. The farm sits on top of, about a third of it is on top of the aquifer that feeds the wells for the town's water supply. And north of the farm is a land where they are monitoring water, but they're also, it is a projected additional water supply for the town if the town grows or if the town needs to replace one of its existing wells. There's source up there. So the farm influences that, and it's not necessarily the best place to put houses. That's one of the reasons Common Ground got involved, because our charter, we're a nonprofit organization and we're tax exempt because we have a public purpose, and that purpose is preservation of natural resources for the future and education about the value of those resources. This farm has an overlap of many of the different resources. It's got water protection involved. It's got the river and the stream, which Malcolm will tell you more about. That's a cold water fishery. There's rare species that live there. I'm not allowed to tell which ones. There's an unfortunate fact that when people know there are rare species, they go and collect them, which is not the best way to keep the population going. There's the beautiful view, which is considered a scenic resource. There's the soils, which John mentioned, which are, some of them on the farm are what's called prime agricultural soil, which is the top quality nationally in comparison to anywhere in the U.S. It's worth not turning up with buildings and other activities, especially since it's productive. And we think that's an important reason for us to get involved and start working on trying to put all this together. So Malcolm can talk a little bit about the river, and Mary brought it up. The river has a tremendous influence on that farm.
It does. There's actually Turkey Brook and the 7 Mile River. I got to know the river when I was on conservation in Spencer. I took the scenic trip in a canoe from Brooks Pond, clean to Quabog Lake, or pond over there. It was quite an experience, but we have an issue with beaver dams that create erosion, and they also create warmer water, so you can't always call it a cold water fisheries, because cold water fisheries need to hang around that 60-degree temperature so that your trout can survive. The 7 Mile River and Turkey Brook are both ideal spawning areas for brook trout. And with some of the beaver activity that we have in Spencer or on that stretch of river, we've lost some of that, and that needs to be brought back. John and I have talked about this. I have removed the beavers several times for John. In the last 5 years since I did beaver removal, he has lost over 12 feet of erosion of farmland to the river. And that is just basically from not being managed the way it should be. Some of the animals that, wildlife that we have there, a lot of people aren't aware that we have mink, we have river otter. This is on the lighter side now. When the stock truck stops, you will see the otter there in the evening with their bib and their knife and their fork, because otter dine on trout like nobody's business. They can smell them 100 miles away. But
Know the
if
sound of the truck.
they know the sound of the truck, because I can guarantee you, they stock today, they'll be there tonight,
Sounds like the ice cream truck to otters.
probably. And then we have mink and the beaver, and then we have, after the fur bearers and the water, we come out to, there's a good abundance of deer. This spring I actually watched some fawns feeding, turkey. We have fair amount of coyotes, fox, gray fox, red fox. And in the last 2 weeks, with doing a little bit of management that I've been doing, I've been watching a nice bobcat. A young
Yes.
bobcat.
Malcolm Saw.
Will that
We
help
are-
with any of the fawns next year?
No, but it sure
Rabbits.
helps with those hungry bunnies.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we're hoping.
And
Yeah.
it's a proven fact that bobcats rise, or the cats rise with the hair and so forth. The other thing I'd like to mention is flyways and waterfowl. That is a good area for waterfowl, especially in fall migration. That's why we have a lot of geese there. There are also resident geese that feed there a lot. In the spring, I have seen many of hooded mariganzas.
Yeah.
I see the buckleheads, the one with the golden eye there. I don't even remember his name anymore. I always get my book out and gotta look. you
Yeah,
know. But
yeah.
there's, I at one time or another, I have counted as many as 6 to 7 different variety of ducks in the spring.
Yeah, they
Just
come
in a-
through,
Yeah.
but it's an
They
important
don't
place that
stay
they.
Oh
there.
yeah, this
But
definitely.
there is, I know of 3 hollow trees down there that have nice batches of young wood ducks, and I
Wood ducks, yeah.
saw the other morning when I was down by the river, the one has 7 ducklings.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And that's just some of the wildlife that's there, the coyotes and the foxes and those things.
When
Nice
Those-
for us to feel that after 30 years of farming, that attempt we made to farm with nature instead of against nature has been working so well.
Yeah, until they move in and eat it. I went to Breezy Bend one year to buy sweet corn, and my favorite is mirai. And the clerk who was actually at the counter apologized they didn't have any mirai because the bears had eaten that first batch.
Yeah, they'd had a really good time with it.
So it's a mixed blessing, but it's one of those places where there has to be a balancing act all the time
It's true.
to make it work.
And the turkeys will do a number, especially when the corn's just sprouting.
Oh, and the
They'll clean out
crows.
the whole, the crows too, but.
I watched.
But if you could somehow convince the goshawks that are over there, and there's a beautiful pair of red tails.
Yeah, oh,
they
God,
got,
yeah.
They're a very, very mature pair of red tails.
Yes.
You got to have close to a 4-foot wingspan at one.
Yeah.
They're
And
big.
if you could convince them to stay there, right around 5:30, 5:45 in the mornings, I see them coming in, and the crows are gone.
Yes,
You
yes.
know, if you could get them to hang around all day long, the geese wouldn't be there, the ducks wouldn't be there, the turkeys probably would do it discreetly.
Okay, so how do we convince them? I'll have
There
we'll have to
was a young
research this.
fledgling last year that
Yeah.
that was out all the time, and you could hear him because all the other birds would go quiet, and then you could hear him come tweet, tweet, through, and
Right.
and I John says, don't take the little dog down to the farm anymore.
I think it also attests to how well the land is cared for. That when I was growing up on that farm, there were no bear, there were no turkey, there were no beaver, there was nowhere near the diversity of wildlife. And I've lived literally within sight of the farm my entire life. I still live on the other side now. And so it says that the land is being cared for, and the fact that it's not being misused, that it's not getting a lot of foot traffic, that it would
Right.
be
Healthy
unhelpful
honey-
to it.
Healthy
Right.
honeybees, healthy honeybees.
Oh,
Honey, one of the
absolutely.
first indicators of environmental damage is unhealthy honeybees, and we have very healthy bees. They produce a ton of honey, and they winter over well down on that farm.
I know for a fact I buy my honey there, and it's darn good.
Yes.
I've
And I
gotten honey
know
there too.
you're very specifically fussy about it too.
Yes, I am.
Well, I think this should probably give you a feel about why we want to keep the farm a farm. We hope that everybody will pitch in. It's a tough time to raise money in Spencer. Clearly, people are somewhat stressed about finances, but if enough people can chip in, then there will be the possibility of keeping this resource for everybody, and local food and good water and places to go and take a look at the wildlife, and also just if you don't hike down there, know it's there for all the future generations. So checks should be sent to Common Ground Land Trust, Post Box 400, Leicester, Massachusetts 01524. We do our work. Common Ground is all volunteers. We don't have a pot of money behind us. We depend on the community to get things done. And we literally don't have the funds to be able to handle credit cards and that sort of stuff. So send the checks to CGLT, Post Box 400, Leicester, Massachusetts. We certainly hope you'll help us out and help yourself out. I want to thank Cable Access for giving this opportunity to talk about the farm. We're lucky to have that group of volunteers. Common Ground's all volunteers. This town, if there's not money, you get it done by rolling up your sleeves and pitching in and doing it. And we hope you'll do that.
And I'd like to add one last word that the Small family wanted me to be sure to tell everyone, and that is that they are incredibly grateful to the town of Spencer for having supported the APR at a very difficult time, and they are in particular wanting to let everyone know how important it was to have a Common Ground come in and work with them. They literally feel that this would not have happened if you and everyone else on that board had not come in, and because they have been looking at an APR there for a long time, and as you know,
Yeah.
their heart is in their land the same way yours is, and so this has been something that meant something to them. But Common Ground came in, you brought the expertise, you brought that spirit of, yes, we can do this, this is really important, and so on behalf of the Small family, I'm going to tell you they are incredibly grateful to you and to the town of Spencer for keeping this alive.
Yeah, it's a pretty overwhelming process.
Yeah,
Look,
It is,
APR
it
is daunting,
It's going to be 2 years since we've started, you know.
right?
It's going to be 2
At
years.
least.
2 years, yeah.
And we're making progress. We're almost there.
Yeah.
If people contribute, we'll make it.
I
Right.
remember Ginny came into the farm market and was talking about how excited they were that the land trust had gotten tax-free status through, and they were looking for a project. And I said, well, if you want a project, it's going to be the saddest thing in the world if the small farm goes into houses. And John and I are devastated that this beautiful farm is at risk. And Ginny said, that might work as a great project to preserve. So we are very appreciative
Yeah, we're
as well.
very appreciative.
Well, and I'm very appreciative of all the people you're not seeing at Common Ground. I mean, the members of Common Ground that give us the base to just be in existence with their dues, and the board who put in a whole lot of time on everything. They're not here mostly out of what, modesty and the fact that the studio is small and they can't all fit. So I think that wraps it up.
The bottom line, Jenny, is it takes a lot of teamwork.
Yeah.
It does.
It takes a
It
lot of
does.
teamwork, and
Yes.
Right.
I've found that when I was on conservation, when we did the trail, then you and I were involved with the Sibley Farm, and now we're involved with this, and it takes teamwork, multiple people.
Lots of people.
Yeah.
Okay,